Welcome to our video on new evidence for the long ending of Mark. Much has been written on the subject, and it's a far more critical issue for the survival of Christianity than seminaries and church bodies are willing to admit. Our goal is not to duplicate excellent research in books by John W. Burgeon in 1871 and Nicholas P. Lunn, that's L-U-N-N, Nicholas P. Lunn, in 2014. But rather to present new evidence for the long ending of Mark. New internal evidence, which authenticates Mark 16, 9 through 20, requires no other source than the Bible itself. New technologies and research into manuscript studies now provide new tools to evaluate the text. The new evidence we will present in this video takes a radically different approach in regard to the nature of Scripture itself. Groundwork for this new evidence is found in these two volumes, In Search of the Biblical Order and Repetition in the Bible. Until the 1950s, Americans had never seen a Bible that questioned the long ending of Mark. The list of Bibles on the left side of your screen, most of them seen on the shelf and many more, all footnote and question the authenticity of the long ending of Mark. Today, one can hardly find a Bible that doesn't question these verses except the King James Version and the Orthodox Study Bible, which says the long ending of Mark is inspired. Now, there is a church body that understands how important the long ending of Mark is to its survival. The majority of readers do not even question the warning in the footnote or the italic that questions the long ending of Mark and simply accept the Bible publisher's opinion of the text as if it was their own religion. Does it really matter if God didn't say these words? There is no middle ground. Church bodies, religious denominations rarely comment on the significance of the problem, not wanting to upset their membership. Before examining new evidence that supports the authenticity of these words, let's take a look at what is at stake if Mark 16, 9 through 20 is fake. First, if the Gospel of Mark ends at verse 8, there are no witnesses to the risen Christ, even though Christ predicts his resurrection in Mark 8:31, 9:9, 9:31, 10:34, and 14:28. Therefore, the Gospel does not arrive at its stated purpose and conclusion. Second, according to the short ending of Mark, the disciples never hear, see, or touch the risen Christ as they do in Matthew, Luke, John, and Acts, nor do they hear or see the angel in Mark 16:6. Therefore, the disciples are not legitimate witnesses or apostles. Even Paul claims he is a witness to the risen Christ. Third, unlike the other three Gospels, there is no call for apostleship, no Great Commission, and no one is sent to preach, teach the gospel of Christ. Thus, any preaching, teaching, baptizing, and evangelizing are by the disciples' own initiative and not Christ's. Without witnesses or a commission, how does Mark meet the definition of a gospel? Fourth, without the long ending, the validity of Mark is based on the report of three women apparently led by Mary Magdalene, none of whom are witnesses to the risen Christ. The entire gospel depends on Mary Magdalene's report about the angel. Fifth, if Mark is the first gospel, as proposed by the advocates of the Markan priority, the other gospels all revise Mark. The short ending presents the risen Christ as a phantom without physicality or embodiment. No matter when it was written, Mark is at best anti-legumena, if not a Gnostic gospel unfit for the New Testament. Therefore, Mark cannot stand alone as a gospel on which to base the Christian religion. Sixth, every theologian, church confession, and doctrine from the beginning of Christendom that quotes Mark 16:16 on baptism has been in error for nearly 2,000 years. No other ritual, ceremony, or sacrament except baptism qualifies the recipient for salvation, not even the Lord's Supper. For Catholics, the loss of Mark 16, 9 through 20 invalidates more than 20 citations from the Catholic Catechism of the Catholic Church, 1994. For Lutherans, it invalidates the fourth chief part of their catechism, 11 major citations in their confessions, and more than 140 citations from the American edition of Luther's works. For seminaries, organizations, and missions, such as the WELS Seminary, it invalidates their use of Mark 16:15 as a model. For the early church, it invalidates more than 25 citations, some quite extensive, from the ante-Nicene Church Fathers, not to mention many other citations in the Nicene and post-Nicene Church Fathers. This is just a sampling of the damage to Christendom without the long ending of Mark. Seventh, Deuteronomy 4, verse 2, 12:32, 13:5, and Revelation 22, 18 through 19 threaten damnation to anyone who adds or takes away from the Bible. In either case, someone is risking their salvation by adding to or deleting the text. Many will be surprised to learn that the survival of the New Testament, as we know it, may depend on the exegetical genius of Professor Rabbi Moshe David Umberto Cassuto. Cassuto's discovery of metered repetition or collocation in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, adds a new dimension to textual authentication. In 1925, the Vatican hired Cassuto, a brilliant Semitic, Hebrew, and Ugaritic scholar, to catalog the world's largest collection of Semitic scrolls. This gave him the rare opportunity to compare variant readings between Hebrew manuscripts. Cassuto fled Mussolini and the Nazis to Jerusalem in 1938. His son was killed in a Nazi death camp, and his daughter-in-law was killed in the Jewish War for Independence in 1948. His grandson became the deputy mayor of Jerusalem. Cassuto's books refute the documentary hypothesis, and he is the author of commentaries on Genesis and Exodus. His commentaries were translated from Hebrew into English in the early 1960s. Cassuto is the first to write about what will be called or identified here in this video as Hebraic meter in the Hebrew Bible. Cassuto's commentaries prove the Bible is written with numerous words, phrases, and sentences dispersed in the text in repetitions of 7s, 10s, and 12s. The new evidence for the authenticity of Mark 16, 9 through 20 is found in the first 5 books of the Bible written by Moses. This is based on the research by Umberto Cassuto, and as it's brought forward from the Old Testament into the Gospels by the Gospel writers. We'll start with Mark, and here we'll see a series of phrases identical, repeated exactly 7 times as predicted by Cassuto, as a part of the meter he identified of 7s, 10s, and 12s. Here we find the phrase, "And he said to them," exactly 7 times in the Gospel of Mark. There you see the Greek, there you see the English, no more than, no less, exactly 7 times, and the phrase that ends in Mark 16:15 is found within the last 12 verses. There the meter finds completion in the long ending of Mark. For this to take place, one would have to know that this phrase should be repeated 7 times. In other words, if it was added by another party and not Mark, he would have to know he was adding the 7th phrase, which is really impossible because nobody knew about this until Cassuto. Now let's look at this phrase in its origin from the Old Testament. Here we find the phrase, "And he said to him," this is God speaking, exactly 7 times. "And he said to him," God speaking, there you see the Hebrew, exactly 7 times, the same letters as the English. And now we see Genesis 3:9 through Genesis 35:11, no more, no less. In the entire 50 chapters of Genesis, this phrase is only found with God speaking 7 times. And it's brought forward from the Old Testament, that is, this genre, right into the New Testament by Mark. Let's see this happen again. Now, we're dealing with phrases that are found within the long ending of Mark. The phrase, in my name, that is, in Jesus' name, in my name, repeats exactly 7 times in the Gospel of Mark. The 7th phrase is in Mark 16:17, again within the long ending of Mark. Notice Mark 9:41 has the letters BYZ, and that means they're referring to here the majority text. The others are BNT, which is referring to Nessel's text. Here we're saying that the majority text has the correct variant, and on this occasion, Nessels has chosen the wrong variant. And there you see the phrase 7 times. The whole thing is coordinated, all arranged according to a Hebraic genre. We'll look at the origin now. Here we have it in the Old Testament. In the first 5 books of the Bible, call in the name of the Lord exactly 7 times in Genesis 4:26 through Exodus 34:5. In the entire 300 pages that it takes to print out the first 5 books of the Bible in most editions, there you see this phrase is found exactly and only 7 times. Now, we're looking at the phrase in Matthew, cast out demons. Why choose this phrase? That's because this phrase appears in the long ending of Mark, but we're going to look and see how Matthew handles the phrase. Matthew takes the phrase, cast out demons, and repeats the genre exactly 7 times. You're not going to find this in any commentary. You're not going to find it in any other kind of literature. No one's writing about it. No one has understood that Cassuto's research, that this rabbi's deep research into the Old Testament, his life's work, actually shows us how much of the New Testament is written as a continuous genre, a Hebraic genre, all the way from the Old Testament into the New Testament. Remember, these are all Hebrew writers, and they're thinking in these terms, and there's understanding to repeat certain phrases exactly 7 times. So Matthew repeats, cast out demons 7 times. He also repeats the same concept of demon-possessed exactly 7 times. No more, no less, no variance. Really quite astonishing that the text is this precise. Now we'll look at the phrase in Luke. Luke takes the same phrase, and he also repeats it exactly 7 times. And you might say, well, maybe he's copying Matthew or somebody else. And the answer is no. Look at the little superscript numbers at the upper left, and you'll see the first set says 0230. The 0 stands for Matthew, which means this event is not in Matthew. It's only in Luke, and then 3 means it's in Mark, and the last 0 means it's not in John. And so here you see that they're copying or following the same Hebraic genre, heptadic meter, of multiples of 7s. But while they're doing it, they're not following the same events. The 2 are operating independently. A remarkable set of circumstances. It's almost indescribable how this is all taking place. How is this possible? Now we're looking at the Gospel of John. He doesn't use the verb. He just has demon and demon-possessed. And he repeats it exactly as in Matthew and in Luke, exactly 7 times. Not a variant there. Notice the multiple zeros in those superscript numbers, which means the event is not the same as in the other Gospels. Now we're going to look at the Gospel of Mark. Notice how Mark has cast out demons exactly 7 times. The phrase repeats throughout the Gospel beginning at Mark 1:39 and continues into Mark 16:9 and 16:17. within the long ending of Mark. So this entire phrase is repeated 7 times and concludes within the long ending. And this would assume that whoever, if this is true, who had forged the long ending of Mark was completely aware of this Hebraic meter when nobody knew about it until Umberto Cassuto. And I defy you to find a commentary, any literature at all, that identifies this kind of Hebraic genre within the Gospels. Now, the Gospel of Mark also has the phrase, he cast out many demons. So the word many is added in 2 occasions. And you might say, well, that kind of breaks the meter. Not so. We'll look a little bit further and notice that the word demon appears in Mark exactly 14 times. And the concluding 2 phrases are found in Mark 16:9 and 16:17. So here we have a 7 within a 7 in double heptadic meter. And Mark is following the genre all the way through, just as we find in the other Gospels. Now, we'll look at this phrase only because it's related in terms of subject, because there are many phrases we could look at. We could look at literally hundreds of these multiples of 7s, 10s, and 12s throughout the Gospels, all relating to the Old Testament. But we're going to look now just at this phrase here because it's connected with the phrase demon-possessed, and it begins in Mark 1:26 and continues to Mark 9:25. And notice, unclean spirits, no variance, exactly 7 times, which means Mark understands the genre. He knows what he's doing, and he's carrying it right through to the end, which must include the long ending of Mark. Now here we look at a kind of a guide to those letters that we're finding at the end of some of the examples that represent different Greek texts. They're derived from 5,800 ancient manuscripts collated into 9 Greek texts, and we're relying on these Greek texts as the basis for variant readings. Matthew, Luke, John, and Mark all set demon and demon-possessed in Hebraic meter. Demon appears in Matthew 12 times. Demon and demon-possessed appears in Luke 24 times, or 2 times 12. Demon appears in Mark 14 times, or 2 times 7. And demon-possessed appears in John exactly 7 times. The anomaly associated with heptadic repetitions of demon and cast out demons in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is that the verses in which these repetitions are found do not record the same event from one gospel to another. In all but one case, the repetitions function independent of the parallel passages. The synoptics only record the same event of casting out demons in Matthew 12:24, 11:18, and Mark 3:22. That's all the same event. The others are all different. It's just an amazing coordination that we're going to be seeing a series of repetitions and a series of events that are not related. Again, we're going to look at cast out demons in Mark, and look at this phrase, cast out demons, in Mark 1:39. There you see the superscript 0. That means it doesn't appear at that location in Matthew, only in Mark, and not the next 2. And that means this phrase is unique to that event, only the Gospel of Mark. And you can see there, as we move down to the 4th location, you'll see that it's found in 3 of them that I just noted in Mark 3:22. As we move on down again, you notice that this meter completes its series of repetitions in heptadic meter within the long ending of Mark. No one could have possibly been aware that this was taking place in the gospel and gone back into the entire gospel and then calculated how they might add these words and still fit in with the meter, when Mark is the only one who could have possibly completed this meter. So this raises questions. Why would Matthew, Mark, Luke all write out demons 7 times and John write demons 7 times, independent of the same events and each other? Where is this genre coming from? The answer is that all four gospel writers are following a prescribed genre for this subject found in the Hebrew Bible. The account of Satan's dialogue with God in Job is divided into two sets of 7, or heptadic meter, as predicted by Cascione. Job chapter 1, 6 through 12, and Job chapter 2, 1 through 7. This is the Hebraic genre the gospel writers follow, all four of them, a genre foreign to classical Greek or Latin and basically overlooked by contemporary scholars. After searching the entire Hebrew Bible, here we have a truly remarkable source and template for the gospel writers employing demon-possessed, cast-out demons, and unclean spirits in heptadic meter, or multiples of 7. The gospel writers were not copying each other. They were copying Job, just as Cascione predicted. The Hebrew Bible is filled with keywords and phrases set in heptadic and decadal and dodecadal meter, that is, multiples of 7s, 10s, and 12s. Notice the word Satan bolded in the middle of the first section there. You'll see it appears 7 times. The bold words in red are the Lord 7 times interacting with Satan, and then it's repeated again 7 more times in the second chapter. This is the source, the template, which the gospel writers were all using. They weren't copying each other. They are picking up a genre or following a genre that was set long ago, established by Moses as the genre for which Scripture should be written. Here we have the genre in Hebrew. The original text, you'll see it in bold type, Satan in bold type in the middle, and in red type, Lord. Notice it's all in reverse, obviously. Notice the symmetry, how all of these words fit together, all planned, just as we saw in the Gospels when they were speaking about demon-possessed, unclean spirits, and cast out demons. One of the major criticisms and mythologies about Mark 16, 9 through 20 is that these 12 verses contain 17 unique words and phrases that are not found in the rest of the Gospel. In other words, there's too many. This can't be Mark's writing because there's too many unique words and phrases, so someone else must have written it. This is supposed to be proof that someone else wrote all of these words. Lunn's data on this subject is presented in this particular slide. There are 13 additional pericopes, approximately the same length as Mark 16, 9 through 20. The first column lists the pericope. The second lists the number of unique words and phrases. The third lists the number of verses. The fourth lists the number of words in the verses. If one calculates the ratio between the numbers of unique words and phrases to the number of words in each pericope, Mark 16, 9 through 20 is in the middle. There is nothing about the vocabulary of Mark 16, 9 through 20 that would indicate that anyone but Mark wrote it. Looking now at phrases, 4 phrases from the long ending of the Gospel of Mark. Mark is writing under the authority of Peter, which is why the early church accepted Mark as a gospel. Notice how phrases in Mark 16, 9 through 20 are found in 1 Peter. In other words, Peter is the one who is dictating or telling Mark what to write down, and the gospel is written under Mark's hand, but by Peter's authority, which is why Mark is a gospel. So if Peter is the author of both of these books, we should find similar vocabulary in the long ending of Mark and in 1 Peter. Here we have the first example, follow after, an unusual Greek word, rarely found in the New Testament. It's not found in any of the Gospels except the last verse of Mark 16 through 20, verse 20, and it's also found in 1 Peter. Second, only Mark and 1 Peter teach salvation by baptism in the New Testament. For example, Mark 16:16, he who has believed and has been baptized shall be saved. And then again, in 1 Peter, baptism now saves you. There are also similar words spoken by Peter in Acts 2:38. Now we're looking at the third example, right hand of God. It only appears once in all four Gospels in Mark 16:19. And then again, we find it in 1 Peter 3:22. And in my name appears in Mark 16:15 and in 1 Peter 4:16. There are many key words that are found and placed in meter. Not every word, but the key words and phrases are found and placed in meter throughout the entire gospel. They must have a conclusion. And so the conclusion for that meter would then reasonably be the end of the gospel, which, according to the long ending, is Mark 16:9 through 20. Here you're looking at the four phrases we just examined that are found in 1 Peter and the long ending of Mark, and you'll see them in bold red. After presenting phrases in Mark on demons, cast out demons, and demon-possessed that complete their meter in Mark 16:9 through 20, with the same literary genre first identified by Cascione in the 5 books of Moses, and then proving that the vocabulary of Mark in 16:9 through 20 is the same literary style as the entire gospel, and then demonstrating that Mark 16:9 through 20 and 1 Peter both employ similar unique vocabulary and phrasing, we now present a veritable avalanche of data proving that Mark 16:9 through 20 is as much a part of the original gospel as your arm is attached to your body. There are numerous key words and phrases that run throughout the Gospel of Mark that complete their heptadic, decadal, and dodecadal meter, that is, multiples of 7s, 10s, and 12s, in the last 12 verses of Mark. After each key word, all the verses for the various repetitions are listed, including the repetitions in bold red type that complete the meter in the long ending of Mark. Here we have heptadic meter, multiples of 7. The first word would be baptism, baptize, Baptist, 21 times. That's 3 times 7, completes its meter in Mark 16:16. Next is believe, 14 times, 2 times 7, completes its meter in Mark 16:13, 14, 16, and 17. Demon, 14 times, that's 2 times 7, completes its meter in Mark 16, 9, and 7. Manifest, visible, 7 times, completes its meter in Mark 16, 12, and 14. Preach, 14 times, that's 2 times 7, completes its meter in Mark 16, 15, and 20. Right hand, 7 times, completes its meter in Mark 16, 19. Sign, 7 times, completes its meter in Mark 16, 17, and 20. Touch, sew upon, dip, harm, 14 times, completes its meter in Mark 16, 18. There's much more. Now we have decadal meter, multiples of 10s. The first example, arise, raise up, rise up against. 20 times the Gospel of Mark, that's 2 times 10. Completes its meter in Mark 16, 9. Lie down, recline with, recline, wear around, 10 times. Completes its meter in Mark 16, 14. Not, neither, 10 times. Completes its meter in Mark 16, 13. Raise, wake up, 20 times, 2 times 10. Completes its meter in Mark 16, 14. Take up, 20 times, that's 2 times 10. Completes its meter in Mark 16, 18. And now there's even more. Dodecadal meter, multiples of 12. Sabbath, 12 times, completes its meter in Mark 16, 9. That, a special Greek word, ekinos, that, 24 times, that's 2 times 12, completes its meter in Mark 16, 10, 13, and 20. Word, that's a special word, logos, word, 24 times, 2 times 12, completes its meter in Mark 16, 20. Now we have multiples of 17. it's not really a meter, it's a compound meter. 7 plus 10. Demon possessed, 17 times completes its meter in Mark 16, 9, and 17. First, again, 7 and 10 for 17. That's adverbs and adjectives, and both are found and complete their meter in Mark 16, 9. Here we have preach, 14 times the Gospel of Mark. Notice in bold blue type the word preach. You see it there, all lined up. Now look at the red words. They represent the Greek word erchomai, to come or go. So we have preach 14 times, 2 times 7, and come or go, the same Greek word, 7 times. So we have a 7 inside of a double 7. You see the complexity piles on top of itself. You have more complex and more complex forms as they work together. Here in this Hebraic form, first originated in the books of Moses. Here's how it all looks in the Greek, the original Greek. You see the blue type and then the red type on the sides, arranged in all its complexity. Thematically, Mark begins and ends with the same Hebrew chiastic form. There we see Mark 1, 4, and then also Mark 16, 15, and 16. Notice that the gospel begins and ends with the same concept. A, B, C, baptize, preach, baptism, preach, baptize. A, B, C, B, A. A perfect chiasm, and it's completed in the long ending of Mark. So who wrote these words? Of the 156 keywords and phrases thus far identified in Mark, set in heptadic, decadal, and dodecadal meter, 19 of these 156 series complete their meter in Mark 16, 9 through 20. Here you see them in bold red type. Look at the array of these repetitions all coming to their conclusion in the last 12 verses. 19 different co-locations completing the repetition with the last 12 verses is nearly 7 times the meter completion found in the other 56 divisions of 12 verses in the entire gospel. In other words, if one divides up Mark into 56 sections of 12 verses, the last 12 verses, that is the long ending of Mark, has 7 times more meter completion than all the others that precede it. So who wrote these words? Here we have an amazing array of all the key words and phrases that conclude the meter in the long ending of Mark in bold red type. This is not, as many have imagined, that someone could sit down and manufacture a long ending of Mark without breaking numerous series of meter running throughout the text. Such an effort, after what has been demonstrated in this video, could easily be exposed as a fraud. But here we see the fraud is to claim that the last 12 verses can be removed from the text without disrupting the entire gospel. Biblical critics can't imagine this kind of complexity holding the gospel together. How would anyone who was going to attempt to write their own ending for the Gospel of Mark be able to coordinate all this meter that precedes it as if it was part of the original gospel? This could only be accomplished by the original author. These words were written by Mark. The question arises, did others use number symbolism? The answer is yes. The Gnostic writers incorporated Pythagoras and Philo's Neo-Pythagorean skewed numeric symbols, in addition to numbers from Daniel, Ezekiel, and Revelation, into their texts. However, there is no awareness from antiquity that metered repetition permeates the Torah and the Gospels. Attempts to claim the Masoretes retro-engineered the Hebrew text do not explain metered repetition from the Torah copied into the Gospels 600 years before the Masoretes. In view of the above data, there is no other option but to identify the last 12 verses of Mark as the original text with the same certainty one identifies the origin of a fingerprint. The ancients did not have photocopy machines, printing presses, and copyrights, but they did have witness accounts. However, at this time, if the original autograph of Mark actually existed, there would be no way to prove it was indeed the original autograph, not according to the current study of manuscript authentication. With the observation of meter in the text, we are able to prove we have the wording of the original text. This entire video has been focused on meter that is found relating to the last 12 verses of Mark as it joins with the entire gospel. However, there's far more data that could be shown. Literally thousands of examples exist showing key words and key phrases moving throughout the texts of the first 5 books of the Bible and the Gospels. For more information on this, you're invited to examine the books introduced at the beginning of this video, In Search of the Biblical Order and Repetition in the Bible. Nothing in this video could be considered as objective evidence if ancient scribes, rabbis, copyists, and early church fathers had been aware that the gospel writers copied metered repetition from Moses. Otherwise, anyone could have retro-engineered the text to fit the genre. However, there is no evidence that anyone prior to Cascione knew this ancient Hebrew literary genre was in the text. Until proven otherwise, this Hebraic genre must also be a divine genre.